Yaakov Katz is a senior columnist at the Jerusalem Post. He's a fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. He's with us from Jerusalem. And now that you've had a few days of people being forced into shelters, as well as some casualties, can you just describe the mood where you are?
Well, Becky, in Jerusalem, actually, we've been a little lucky over the last two nights. Sirens have not been going off here. It seems that the Iranian missile assaults are very much focused at the moment on the center of the country, on the north, some of the more strategic installations. We know that, for example, an Iranian missile hit a gas refinery plant in the city of Haifa in the north. So the missiles for now seem to be very focused on that coastal line that you know very well, from the north of Haifa all the way down to Tel Aviv and a little further south, as well as some of the Air Force bases that they keep trying to hit further south in the Negev desert near the city of Beersheba. So it's still very anxious. People are concerned. I can tell you, just personally speaking, my brother, sister-in-law, and two nieces who live near Tel Aviv have moved into our house here in Jerusalem to get out of the rocket's way. Here it's a little safer, as much as we can call it that.
Yaakov, US intelligence officials believe that Israel's attacks have set back Iran's nuclear program, but only by a matter of months. The head of the IAEA says that Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities have been severely impacted, but not wiped out completely. Speaking to CNN in the past hours, he did say that one key site in particular has suffered significant damage. From your sources and from those you are speaking to in authority in Israel, how do you assess Israel's sense of success to date?
Well, the success needs to be looked into three different categories. There's first the skies of Iran. Israel has pretty much opened them up. There's no real threat today to Israeli aircraft, and that gives Israeli aircraft the ability to operate quite freely over Iran today, a country that is nearly 1,500 kilometers away from where I am. The second category is the ballistic missiles. Yes, they still are able to fire some, not at the level that we initially anticipated. It is also true that about 10% do land. There is no such thing as 100% missile defense. But when considering that 90% of the missiles are intercepted by Israeli and American interceptors, that is also quite a significant accomplishment. But to the third category of the nuclear program, this is something that is still time is needed for. Israel has caused some extensive damage at Natanz, which is the main enrichment facility. There are still questions of whether Israel has penetrated the lower chambers where the main centrifuges and those halls of cascades of centrifuges were located. But there are indications that by hitting the electrical plant that supplied the currents of electricity to the centrifuges, they might have caused some irreparable damage. And the IAEA has said so much that to those facilities and to those centrifuges at Natanz. But the big one, Becky, the big question mark is Fordo, and that is buried about a kilometer deep inside a mountain near the holy city to the Shia Muslims called Qom. That is the facility that Israel alone cannot penetrate, and that is what everyone is talking about, whether Donald Trump will send those B-2 bombers with the MOP, the massive ordnance penetrator, a 13-ton bomb, and whether he will do so to be able to once and for all really set back the Iranians in a way that Israel cannot do on its own.
And the US president's decision, as yet unconfirmed, his rhetoric, unconditional surrender, for example, which is what he posted to the Iranian regime overnight on Truth Social, indicates at least that the US could get involved in this fight. CNN reporting that Israeli officials are optimistic on that point. What are you hearing?
Look, Israeli officials, I think, very much would like to see a more active U.S. role in this, and that really, if the American military were to take on some of these more hardened targets, whether it's Fordo and some others, and what's left remaining of the Iranian military and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, it can finish up business quite quickly, and it would really decimate what the Iranian regime has left for its military But with that said, this is going to be a U.S. decision. And I think it's 50-50 at this point. It could be that what we're seeing with those tweets from the president is a lot of brinksmanship, saber rattling, all meant really to get the Iranians to willingly dismantle, to come back to the table and say, we're willing to get rid of our enrichment. We don't need that anymore, which was true. They never really needed uranium to 60%. There's no civilian use. It's only for military purposes. And if that were to happen, that would be a potentially good ending for all sides.
If the US gets involved, the nuclear program will presumably be their target. But Israeli leaders have made no secret of the fact they wouldn't mind if this regime fell in the process. What is Israel expecting, were that to be the case, on a day after?
I really encourage a lot of humility back here in Israel when talking about potential regime change. We've had too many examples throughout even recent history where the Americans have tried this in different countries. Israel had a bad experience back in the 80s in Lebanon. Regime change is not something that is easily done, and it doesn't always end up the way you want it when you're thinking about doing it. I think what we see happening is that Iran is much more of a paper tiger or a spider web than we initially thought. It's not as strong, it's not as resilient, and the people are not united behind their very oppressive regime led by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And that does create an opportunity for some sort of change or a public uprising. We've seen, Becky, and you've reported on this for years, the protests within Iran, whether it was the women who no longer wanted to have to cover their hair, or the green movement back in 2009 during Barack Obama's presidency. There is that movement, there is that feeling on the ground that things can be better for Iran, and Israel has always made a distinction. Our problem is not with the Iranian people. Our problem is with this regime that calls for our annihilation. So if something can change, I really think it has to come from within, and that we should just be humble and approach this with humility, not think that we can orchestrate from afar what is best for the people of a country of 70, 80 million people.
It is not clear at all what that change might look like, i.e. who might lead that change, either, you know, somebody who is outside of Iran at present or, you know, people inside. And there is obviously significant concern that Iran could descend into civil war or instability at this point without any clear stewardship or leadership in place for a day after. You and I will continue to discuss this. Yaakov, it's good to have you on. Before I let you go, we've learned this morning that Israel has launched a program to repatriate citizens stranded abroad by flight cancellations. And you've written, quote, why Israelis are trying to escape from holiday beaches back to a war zone. Can you just briefly explain that drive?
Well, I was on a flight Thursday night back to Tel Aviv, and we were supposed to land just as the attacks began. My flight was diverted, an El Al flight to Cyprus, where I was stuck for about 2 days. And all those 2 days, every Israeli I met in Cyprus was doing the same thing. How do we get back home to our families who were hunkering down in bomb shelters, to one of my daughters who's an officer in the Israeli Defense Forces. And 2 nights ago, Sunday night, I was able to find a spot on a tugboat, Becky. And we sailed 17 hours from Limassol back to Haifa. And I'll tell you, one really crazy moment was as we're setting sail off in the distance, heading towards Israel, we see interceptions. And that just made it clear, this is it. We're moving into a war zone, but there wasn't a single person among the 9 passengers with me who said, no, we should turn back. It strengthened the resolve to get back to our country in its hour of need.
Yaakov Katz in Jerusalem, thank you for joining us this morning.